Hello everyone, this is a video I actually hate to do, but I figured sooner or later everybody was going to get mad enough at me for not speaking about avian influenza. It is the elephant in the room right now. So I'm going to read facts and figures and information that we've gathered, leave out any opinion, and hopefully nobody can get mad. Okay, what is avian influenza? It is commonly known as the bird flu. It is a viral infection that primarily affects birds, but can also infect humans and other animals. It is caused by influenza A viruses, which are highly adaptable and can lead to new viral variants with zoonotic potential, which means it can spread to people. They're categorized into two main subsets based on their pathogenicity: low pathogenicity avian influenza, LPAI, and high pathogenicity avian influenza, HPAI. HPAI is primarily associated with a couple of different subtypes, has shown significant spread and impact on both bird and mammalian species, highlighting the need for ongoing surveillance and control measures. Our current system is simultaneously highly efficient in terms of production per square foot, so that's confinement animal, food animal raising, but it's also very wasteful. We produce enormous quantities of low-cost protein in these confinement animal operations, but approximately 30 to 40% of the food produced never gets consumed, which is really interesting. But when we wipe out entire poultry flocks that test positive, or we wipe out cattle herds because they've got some sort of problem, we are ending up wasting a lot of food. Some of that ends up in the pet food industry. That's a different topic for a different day. The poultry industry regularly faces mass cullings due to disease outbreaks, and so this is not the avian influenza is not the first time we've wiped out poultry flocks. Because we are working so hard to have these highly efficient systems to raise millions of birds in very small spaces, it amplifies disease spread. It's sort of like why in the winter we see so much more respiratory illness, because people are congregating inside in higher populations. We also see more kennel cough in our dogs. We get more disease when we have more beings crowded into a smaller space. Bird flu is not new. Agriculture's been addressing it for many years. I think somewhere in here it says since 1996. It might even be longer. Australia, shifting 25% of Australian chicken farms to free-range farming, actually increased the risk of influenza outbreaks. We decrease the risk when we put biosecurity measures in place. So for instance, if you wanted to go visit a dairy farm or a poultry farm, they would have biosecurity. You would have to probably dress in clothing that would be protective, protecting you and also protecting the flock. They usually have you go, so for instance, veterinarians going onto farms have to go through a huge wash system, wash their boots, wash their tires, so that they're not bringing anything onto the farm and not taking anything off the farm. The risk of this disease actually comes from migratory birds. It was amplified at a biosecurity lab in Athens, Georgia, to be more invasive in mallard ducks, which made it then, those are migratory birds, so if they go land at a poultry farm where they have a pond, it's made it very easy to spread the avian influenza through wild migratory birds. The biosecurity conditions are usually in place at these big farms, but backyard flocks, people usually don't have biosecurity. So if you have a backyard flock of chickens and they're free ranging and you have ducks or geese or migratory birds landing in your fields where your chickens are, they could potentially be exposed to avian influenza. So that's why we also need to be monitoring our backyard flocks. We were talking about it with our flock the other day. They are confined. They're no longer allowed to free range. They have an outdoor space, but it's completely wired in so no birds can get in. And that's because of our local fox, who thinks that she should have our chickens for dinner. So I feel like our birds are pretty safe. We don't really have exposure or direct contact with other migratory birds. All of this hit the pet industry pretty hard in the last couple of weeks due to a couple instances of animals getting sick, supposedly from raw pet food that they ate that was raw poultry. There are a lot of unanswered questions here, and I'm going to read Susan Thixton's thoughts from Truth About Pet Food because she usually has a pretty good handle on these things. So she said, the Oregon Department of Agriculture just proved to the entire world they are a corrupt regulatory organization. How? By violating the #1 rule in testing protocol and recall procedure. First, sincere sympathies to the family whose cat died. The loss is devastating regardless of how it came about and the actions of the Oregon Department of Agriculture. The background, Northwest Naturals Pet Food initiated a recall on Christmas Eve for highly pathogenic avian influenza virus. This was the first confirmation of HPAI in a pet food in the U.S. However, the testing of the pet food was performed by the Oregon Department of Agriculture on an opened bag of pet food. Opened. Fact, it is mandatory for regulatory authorities to test unopened samples. The protocol for USDA, FDA, and all state departments of agriculture is to test an unopened sample, one that has not been adulterated or potentially contaminated by outside sources. An open sample is not an acceptable sample to force a company to recall. An open sample can be contaminated from outside sources prior to analysis. Laboratory analysis of an open sample should never be used to issue a press release frightening a world of pet owners. And let me tell you, the fright is palpable if you're on social media. But in this instance, Oregon Department of Agriculture did not test any unopened packages of Northwest Naturals pet food. Instead, they issued an alarming press release relying on lab analysis of an open bag of pet food, neglecting to disclose to the public their lack of following proper procedure. Susan has placed multiple phone calls to the Oregon Department of Agriculture asking for a statement on this. No response. A world of pet owners deserves a full investigation. So feel free to call the governor of Oregon and ask why this was done improperly and why they did not test an unopened bag of the same lot before issuing that press release. Oregon Department of Agriculture has severely damaged the public's confidence in raw pet food by neglecting to follow their own required procedures. Susan says, I have 5 cats and I still feed them raw pet food. Oregon Department of Agriculture has not changed my mind in the least. Here's another one from Susan. Another H5N1 avian flu positive testing of raw pet food. This is from the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, advising residents not to feed their pets monarch raw pet food sold at several farmers markets in California due to detection of H5 bird flu virus in product samples. A house cat that consumed the product has been confirmed H5 bird flu positive. 4 other house cats from the same household are presumed to have also been positive after consuming the product. Presumed to have been positive. I guess they didn't get tested. Residents who fed their pets monarch raw pet foods or other raw meat or dairy products and notice their pet is experiencing symptoms should immediately contact their veterinarian. A listing of farmers market locations where the raw pet food was sold can be found on the product website. It is unknown why in this instance and in the instance of Northwest Naturals with the Oregon Department of Agriculture, positive testing of an opened product that the FDA and the USDA are remaining silent on this concerning issue. So we've got 2 local and a state health department testing opened containers of food and issuing recalls and press releases. Wrong, not supposed to be done that way. The FDA has jurisdiction over pet food and should be the agency to publish recall notices and specific alerts to pet owners regarding pet food. However, as of the publishing of this post, the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine has not published any information for either pet food brand. As well, the FDA Enforcement Report Records has no current information available on either pet food brand. The USDA has jurisdiction over meats used in pet foods. This federal agency would be responsible for issuing recalls of meat, publishing public notices regarding H5N1 bird flu positives at the farm level, and overseeing depopulation of positive flocks of poultry. As of the publishing of this post, the USDA has remained silent on both of these reports of positive testing of pet foods. Unfortunately, pet owners are left in an unacceptable position of being in limbo. We're unable to move forward until someone of proper authority tells us what is or is not happening in pet food. So this is from Chelsea Kent of Solutions Pet Products. Quote, the risk of dogs and cats contracting avian influenza from consuming raw contaminated meat appears to be primarily theoretical rather than a widely documented mechanism of infection. Proven cases of infection. There are no robust studies or well-documented large-scale incidents proving that dogs or cats contract avian influenza from consuming contaminated raw meat alone. Reports of avian influenza in pets cats in Africa in Asia infected with H5N1 often involve direct exposure to infected live or dead birds rather than through meat consumption. And I know there was a big cat sanctuary, I believe, in Washington where all the cats got sick and died. Again, I don't think these are house cats who are housed inside, and they would be exposed to migratory birds. Maybe we found H5N1 in the food, but did the cats contaminate the food, or did the food contaminate the cats? Do we have answers on that? No. And that's the same thing with this Los Angeles and Oregon problem. Experimental studies in laboratory conditions have occasionally demonstrated infection when animals were deliberately exposed to high viral loads, but it does not reflect normal dietary or environmental exposures. The acidic pH of a dog or cat's stomach, especially in animals accustomed to raw diets, is highly hostile to most pathogens, including viruses like avian influenza. The low pH inactivates or destroys many pathogens before they can colonize or infect the host. The FDA Salmonella study supports this protective mechanism. When 16 dogs were fed chicken that was intentionally contaminated with Salmonella, 56% successfully neutralized 100% of Salmonella strains in their gut, 100% exhibited no symptoms, and only 8% shed the pathogen they were fed in their feces. The primary risk pathway for pets contracting avian influenza remains inhalation of respiratory secretions or direct contact with infected birds or their excretions, not ingestion of meat. Any risk from raw meat would likely depend on high viral load in the meat, compromised gastric acid levels due to medications like antacids or illnesses, pre-existing mucosal or intestinal injuries. Safety notes. Proper cooking kills the virus, but safe handling of raw poultry is still crucial. Wash hands and surfaces thoroughly after handling raw poultry. Keep raw meat separate from other foods to prevent cross-contamination. Even in areas with bird flu outbreaks, properly cooked poultry products are safe to eat. The virus is killed when food reaches 165 degrees Fahrenheit. It needs to be maintained for just a few minutes. The center, thickest part of the meat must reach the temperature, and for eggs, cook until both the yolk and white are firm. Avoid eating or feeding any pink or undercooked poultry meat. This is for you. Me personally, I'm not so worried. This virus has been around for a while. The thing with this cat in Oregon, it was supposed to be an indoor cat. But the owner of the pet store that sold the food to that owner said she brought the cat with her to the store all the time. Therefore, the cat was not totally an indoor cat. This cat went outside. This cat could have had exposure. I don't know if this cat walked on a leash, was on the ground, where there could be bird droppings or other things. We don't know. But what we do know is this was originally put out as this is a totally indoor cat that has zero exposure, and the open bag of food was positive and the cat was positive. However, there's a lot of unanswered questions there. So we're just keeping an open mind because we don't know. Northwest Natural uses HPP, so it employs high pressure to inactivate foodborne pathogens such as Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria. So there's still questions about whether HPP kills the virus. In theory, it should. If the pressures are high enough, long enough, it should kill any viral pathogens that are in the food. Again, leaves a big open question mark. And even though the raw pet food community is on high alert, this virus poses very low risk to humans. We'll get into that a little bit more. While the U.S. public health authorities have reassured the public that the safety risk to cattle, meat, and pasteurized milk is very low, concerns about potential impacts on prices and livelihoods of farmers have arisen. The CDC has issued recommendations to avoid consumption of raw or undercooked food. They have always said that. Or related uncooked food products such as unpasteurized raw milk or raw cheese from animals with suspected or confirmed infection with the virus. Now, here's the thing. Before meat is sold for human consumption, before any bird leaves a turkey farm or a chicken farm to be processed, that flock is tested. If there's a positive test, the flock is destroyed. So we've had millions and millions of flocks destroyed. That's why when you go to the grocery store, the price of eggs is very high, if they have any at all, and the price of chicken and turkey has gone up. It's getting close to that of steak at this point. When a pet food company sources human-grade meats, they're sourcing from flocks that had testing, and it was put into the human food chain. Therefore, we shouldn't have contaminated meat going into that food chain. That is why it is so crucial to source your raw food, if you're going to feed raw, from human food sourcing. so that we know that testing has been done. Ask your pet food company. Most of them have now put out statements. Most of these raw food companies that are doing the right thing, most of them have put out statements. We need to start with a base of healthy birds who are not exposed to contaminated birds, and that completely eliminates the risk of birds getting to the good pet food companies. Although dogs can also contract HPAI, they currently appear to be less susceptible to the virus than cats. I saw a great study talking about the viral receptors in the body. Cats have many more receptors to this virus than dogs and other mammals do. At present, HPI has not been detected in dogs in the United States. It is best practice to limit dog exposure to HPAI by following the same recommendation as for cats. Dogs should not be fed any products from affected farms if those products have not been thoroughly cooked or pasteurized. So, don't buy bad meat. All right, so given H5N1 circulation among wild and migratory bird populations, along with clade 2.3.4.4b's knack for infecting a broad range of mammalian species and the associated morbidity and mortality rates, experts worry H5N1 will eventually mutate into a lethal strain capable of human-to-human transmission, setting off a pandemic. Oh boy. However, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, reports the current risk to individual and population health remains low and has not significantly changed from the most recent assessment done on a similar H5N1 virus that caused an outbreak among mink in 2023 in Spain. Non-commercial pigs on a mixed species farm in Crook County, Oregon, were found to be infected. In late October, the Oregon Department of Agriculture, they're all over this, diagnosed H5N1 in poultry on the affected farm. Days later, the USDA confirmed the virus in 2 of 5 pigs on the farm, marking the nation's first reported H5N1 swine infection during the current epizootic. Genomic sequencing indicated that both the infected poultry and swine harbored the same genotype. Similar sequences were found in local migratory birds. Here's our issue. Suggesting the farm animals likely contracted the virus through contact with these birds rather than from other livestock. In short, it was a new introduction rather than a lateral transfer on the farm. The farm's setup was where poultry and swine shared water sources, housing, and equipment, and that may have facilitated interspecies transmission, and one pig was seen eating a dead duck prior to the outbreak. A new study funded by the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, found no evidence of human-to-human transmission of bird flu, and that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. In cases identified to date, H5N1 viruses generally cause mild illness, mostly conjunctivitis of short duration, predominantly in U.S. adults exposed to infected animals. Most patients receive prompt antiviral treatment. No evidence of human-to-human transmission was identified. PPE, protective equipment, use among occupationally exposed persons was suboptimal, which suggests that additional strategies are needed to reduce exposure risk. So this is all the case patients who were exposed to infected poultry were involved in depopulation activities. So they're depopulating because they have a positive flock. So that's going to be a high level of exposure. Human bird flu cases that have occurred to date are essentially in people with workplace exposures to infected animals. No person-to-person spread of bird flu has been detected, and nearly all infected individuals in California had exposure to infected cattle. And there have been a few people that have died with HPAI. The most recent was in Louisiana. That person was over age 65 and had multiple comorbidities. They haven't said what those were. This is a case where if your immune system is not working, you are definitely going to be more likely to suffer more ill effects. But in general, this is a mild virus. In the cats that have died, clearly it's been more severe. But again, there's still too many questions about the exposure on those cats. I did read one article, which makes perfect sense, that said that stray cats and outdoor cat populations are more susceptible to becoming infected than indoor cats. Well, duh, they're exposed to birds. So to top it off, the USDA is currently conducting field trials of a handful of HPAI vaccines for poultry and dairy cattle. While certain livestock industries are eagerly awaiting an approved vaccine, others are less enthusiastic. There are a number of reasons for the hesitancy. Likely restrictions on exports of U.S. beef and poultry products is one. Another is that vaccination can complicate disease surveillance efforts by making it difficult to distinguish between vaccinated animals and those naturally infected. There are also concerns that vaccination could result in the genesis of even more lethal HPAI strains capable of evading the vaccine. Lots and lots of unanswered questions. All I can say is my dogs and cats are still eating their raw pet food products that are well sourced from very competent companies with all human grade ingredients. So I don't feel that we have anything to be concerned about in my family. But everybody gets to make their own decision. If you are concerned, switch to gently cooked if you're a raw feeder. Gently cook the food yourself. Make sure your sourcing is good. That's the most important thing here.